The ever increasing costs of healthcare in America. There is a strike that is going on here in Minnesota. This is a massive healthcare strike. 15,000 Minnesota nurses walk off the job. And of course, the narrative is that it's not about pay. We've got 15,000 nurses in Minnesota who went on strike on Monday morning, saying they are fighting for better staffing and better care for their patients. And this is always the case, always fighting for more staffing. They don't have enough staffing. But one of the biggest problems when it comes to staffing in nurses, what is it, nurses or doctors, is because you have a lot of women. You have a lot of women that work in this particular field. One of the reasons is because it's overinflated in terms of the amount of people that enter into the field and quit. That's one of the biggest reasons why healthcare is so expensive. The other thing is that you have a lot of very heavy, physically heavy, right? The average patient that typically comes coming into the hospital is north of 200 pounds. Overwhelmingly, the sicker patients are typically men, and a lot of the chronically ill are typically women. And it's just because women live longer than men do, and men, of course, at times are much more, less likely to seek medical attention. But overwhelmingly, many of the patients that are coming in are very physically sick, and many of these individuals who don't take care of themselves are living longer. So they're coming into the hospital sicker at your expense, of course, because this is overwhelmingly funded by taxpayers. Now, the article goes on to say, of course, the unions have negotiated with hospitals, and one of the things that they did agree on was increasing the pay of some of the staff. But of course, what the staff really wants is they want the nurse to patient ratio to come down. But unfortunately, there just aren't a lot of nurses. We are in a shortage. Many nurses retired during the pandemic. Many nurses that were on the fringe of do I want to stay on? And once the pandemic came around, many of them quit. Many of them were fired because of refusal to take the jab. And so, shocker, this caused a nursing shortage. And that's why nurses now, some nurses were making more than doctors. You had some nurses that were taking home 10 and 12,000 a week as a nurse, working 3 days, making 10 and 12,000 a week during the pandemic. And some of them, of course, the prices are still high in certain areas because of the shortages. And of course, overwhelmingly, this is one, you need more men in nursing, which may or may not happen in the future because men are typically going to take, maybe more physically demanding jobs. And it's not that nurses don't get paid well. Nurses get paid a lot. But overwhelmingly, you see a stigma. There's only 8%, I think at best, 8% of nurses are men. And one of the biggest problems in nursing is that a lot of women just can't handle the stress of the job. As we're seeing here, this is from 2025. And if you think that there are shortages now in healthcare, just wait. New survey coming out of Forbes shows that up to 47% of U.S. healthcare workers plan to leave their position by 2025. And this is something that most of us have known. 90% of nurses consider leaving their profession in year one. So if you get a lot of these women that come into nursing, they think it's going to be glorious. I don't know how many times it's funny listening to some nurses, like a patient has to go to the bathroom, or you have a patient that was incontinent, and they're like, I went to nursing school for 4 years. I don't clean patients. And it's like, bitch, fuck out of here. And many of these people don't last. You get some of these ones they come in with their pretty little nails. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They're not really there to take care of patients. They're there for the overrated paycheck. As many nurses, for a 4-year degree, it's not that difficult, especially if you live in a major city. I mean, shit, California, nurses make over $100,000 a year. Same thing in New York. When I worked in New York, especially if you're a guy and you're willing to put in the amount of 12-hour shifts, shoot, you can easily hit 150, 160 a year. But you have to be willing to do it, and you have to be willing to work short. It's always funny, when we actually had staffing, then the people would be like, there's no overtime. And they'd have to go and go someplace else because they wanted to do overtime. And then when there was overtime, then they'd be like, there's no staffing. And it's like, what? You can't have it both ways. Either you're going to work short and be willing to do overtime, or you're going to have, decent staffing. And this is one of the things that happened in the hospital I was at when I was at New York Presbyterian, and the nurses striked for more money. They wanted more money. And they said, the only thing that we can do, but that the hospital was willing to do, is they're like, well, we're going to cut ancillary staff. And so the nurses got their raise, right? The nursing staff got their raise, and then they started to cut the aides. Instead of having 2 aides, we had 1 aide. Sometimes we'd have no aide. And this is what they warned them, that this was going to be the result, that you can have more money, or we can give you more ancillary staff. We can have more techs. We can have more people to draw blood. We can have more people to do EKGs, right? So it reduces the amount of work that you have to do, but you're still going to do it for the same amount of pay. And they're like, no, we want more pay. And the hospital was like, okay. They gave them what they want, and then everybody's like, where are the aides at? How come we don't have an aide? There's no transporter. What do you mean I have to bring my own patient down to CT, etc.? It is what it is. And nearly 1 out of 5, and this has always been the way, nearly 1 out of 5 nurses leave first job within a year. And this is according to a survey of licensed nursing, registered nurses. And this is true. Overwhelmingly, you have like 25% of nurses quit in year 1. And then the statistic goes from year 1 to year 3, about another 40% of those remaining quit. So you have this huge rotating door of individuals that are coming in and then leaving. And it's the same thing. I talked about this with doctors. We have up to 40% of doctors, female doctors, that by year 6, they're like, I'm done. They go off, have a kid. Maybe they come back and do part-time. More than likely, they don't. Same thing with lawyers. A lot of these jobs that are very high demanding, that they're very high demanding of your time, and sometimes they can either be physically, or they'll just be more emotionally stressful, dealing with people who are sick, dying. Some people come in, they're assholes in the hospital. You get some people who are alcoholics and they're drunk. So there's a tendency for violence, and a lot of people just don't want to put up with this, especially if you're a woman. It's like you're coming in, you get a lot of these guys that come into the hospital, and they're like frequently coming to the hospital for alcohol intoxication, and you're constantly calling, security. Because, if you're a guy and a guy tries to flex on you, you're just going to pin him to the bed. This has happened numerous times in the hospital. You get some of these patients that want to fight, and you're just going to pin them down. And some of these people are just like strong as fuck. And if you're a woman, these people just run out the door. And I've seen this happen numerous times where you have the nurses where there's a little bit of confrontation. They'll come out, screaming, etc. And it's just because they're not physically able to handle the stress of obviously dealing with some of these patients. But overwhelmingly, it's the emotional stress that many nurses just not able to handle it. And so what you get is people that are just like, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to quit. I'm going to go do something else. Now, for a lot of these women that have been in the field for a very long time, some of the older women, they're just like, especially look at some of the new nurses, like, this is normal. You should get used to it. But for a lot of these, young women coming in, very soft, not, just there to look good, thinking that they're going to sit at the nurse's station. And it's not that the job is that demanding. I mean, you give a couple of meds, you help a couple of patients to the bathroom, maybe you're dealing with pain, you're doing some wound care, patients are dying every night you come to the hospital. More or less, it's typically very routine. But I hear this very often, and I travel from hospital to hospital and from state to state as a travel nurse. And this is typically quite routine, that you just get too many people that are coming into the field, and they're just coming in for the check, thinking that they're not going to do anything for it. And then when they realize that, this is a lot more stressful than I thought, and they unfortunately leave. And this is what keeps the cost of healthcare very high. And that's why when you look at, for example, firemen get paid less than nurses. Police, right? Construction workers, a lot of these jobs that are very physically demanding, but there's so many men that what does that do is it keeps the cost low. Unfortunately, we need more men, because then obviously it would make it, they would be able to handle the stress, especially the physical stress of dealing with many of these much heavier patients, right? You're moving patients at times, or patients that need to be readjusted in the bed, people that fall. I mean, there was one patient that fell the other day. It was like 250, 300 pounds. And it takes, the whole unit basically to pick this person off the floor. And that's very stressful for women, thinking that they're going to hurt somebody. A lot of these people are very heavy, etc. And so sometimes it's just very physically, emotionally demanding. And for many of these nurses in Minnesota, they were like, enough is enough. But thankfully, it's only a 3-day strike. So you really, who knows if it'll be enough pressure for the local government to say, okay, we're going to add, more nurses here. But overwhelmingly, the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to end up losing ancillary staff. There're going to be less people, doing maintenance. There's going to be less aides, less techs for doing blood draws and EKGs, etc. More than likely, this is what will happen. They'll get an extra nurse, but they'll lose, 2 aides, or they'll lose an aide and a tech, etc. But this is the unfortunate thing of working with healthcare. I do feel sorry for a lot of these nurses who get into the field and not quite ready to put in the hard work. But you're going to see this moving forward. By 2025, we're already in a shortage. A lot of nurses, baby boomers, the biggest generation existing. And a lot of the nurses are elderly. A lot of nurses that are in their late 50s and 60s. And over the next couple of years, a lot of them are going to retire. And there isn't going to be the ranks. When I was in Jacksonville, and that was where I did my first travel assignment, and I was at a hospital there. And during orientation, they said, some of the fun facts that they go over, and they were like, the average age of our nurses is 24. And the first thing that popped in my eye, I was like, that's terrible, because you have a lot of nurses that are just that don't have the experience, right? So most of your nurses are literally straight out of nursing school. You got all these nurses that literally straight out of nursing, 6 months at best, and they're filling in roles of like ICU and the more technically advanced, or they're on the med surg floors, and you have less critically thinking and less watchful eyes watching patients, and it will have an impact on the quality of care that is given, on the ability of the nurse to sense something is going wrong, to pay attention, to see that a patient is declining. And this is what will happen in the hospitals. And of course, a lot of that, going into a hospital is a crap shot, especially when you're old. If you go in there alone, you don't have any family members, mistakes are made, wrong medication, someone doesn't catch, a low blood pressure at the right time, etc. Or maybe they talk about a certain pain and they're just like thinking that it's a normal pain instead of contacting the physician because this is a symptom of X, Y, and Z. And it's just because of a lack of experience. And unfortunately, because many hospitals become desperate, like during COVID, right? Many of these hospitals were very desperate for nurses, and they'll be like, we'll take anybody. We just need somebody. We just need a body. But that doesn't translate to adequate healthcare. It is what it is. This is the state of America moving forward. We will continue to see this, of course, not just in healthcare, but in also more of the technically related fields like engineering, typically STEM, right? Your science, your technology, your engineering, and math. You will see a lot of shortages moving forward. And that's why I always say, if you're a man, go out there and get a skill, get a trade, right? You can become a plumber, an engineer, pick your field, but pick something especially that is infrastructurally needed, right? During the pandemic, nurses didn't get fired, right? Engineers weren't getting fired, police, right? None of these jobs are necessary. They're necessary for sustaining cities and countries. And that's why I always recommend go out there and get a skill, and then you can transfer that skill, or you can transfer that skill from state to state. You can transfer that skill from country to country, right? So you can't go I can't go to another country and be like, here's my nursing license. They're not going to accept it. But if you're a plumber, if you're an engineer, that will travel with you wherever you go. Anyway, I'm going to leave you here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.